Is it worth buying a used car, truck, or SUV? With today's car prices as high as they are, everybody wants a deal. Who can afford a $100,000 truck or an $80,000 car? Not too many people, so a lot of people are looking for deals. But how do you find great deals on the used car market? Because that's clearly where the best bang for buck is. Well, you could check a lot of places like auction houses, you could check dealerships, private sales. There's a lot of great options. But not everybody knows those things to look at. Well, I'm gonna help the noobs out there, the folks that aren't necessarily the most mechanically inclined, and give you some of the tips that you can check this vehicle from top to bottom and make sure that you're getting a great deal and a great car that can likely last hundreds of thousands of more miles and save you a ton of cash. And this is just proof that you don't need to buy a 1 or 2 year old vehicle. Sure, while you can go get a pre-purchase inspection, I would always suggest doing that if you're buying something that's a lot more expensive. Say you're putting into a $30 or $40 or $50,000 car, you probably want to take it to the dealer of that type of manufacturer to get them to give it the once over. But you can still do a quick once over like I'm about to show you, so it'll give you an idea whether you can waste your hard-earned money or not, even doing that pre-purchase inspection. So right here we have a 2003 Ram. So there's a few things you want to do, of course. When you have a used vehicle, one of the major things you have to consider are rust. The chassis, the frame underneath, the bodywork, because you can always rebuild a starter, you can always rebuild put in some new parts like cooling system parts, even rebuild an engine. But if the body's falling apart, it's hardly worth it. First of all, you want to give these vehicles a good looking over. Take a good look around. From a distance, make sure that panel fitment is good. Look at the lines on the doors. Everything looks consistent. So clearly not a lot of indication that there's been any accident history. Clearly, everything looks fairly straight. And then as we look along here, we also see that line's consistent with that line and no big waves or oddities here. Now, there's a few dents here. Obviously, you're gonna find marks. It's a used vehicle. I wouldn't sweat little stuff like this. You see a few dents, probably a couple shopping carts, a couple little scratches like this. Not the end of the world, just as long as you make a note of that. What you don't want to see are major structural damage, and you could do that with the pre-purchase inspection, of course, or get a Carfax or a CarProof, and it'll tell you once you get the VIN, and the VIN you can pull from up here. The VIN is listed right here, or the VIN is also listed either down there on that bar, or sometimes you'll find the VIN identified on a plaque right there. Now, of course, to note, that VIN should match this VIN, and if they don't, that's a red flag. Even just doing a quick look around, you can tell pretty quickly if the bodywork has been damaged or not. This vehicle looks very, very clean. I don't see a lot of rust. I do see some surface rust, so you want to look at places like this. There is a little frame rust in there, but nothing. It's pretty solid. I mean, for a vehicle that spent most of its days in the frozen north where they throw all kinds of salt and sand, this actually does not look bad. And in this wheel well section here, this is all metal and clearly nothing rusted there. The frame, yeah, sure, you've got spring rust, but that's just surface corrosion on heavy iron. So that's not the end of the world right there. But you want to look here. And if you don't see rust in places like that, if you don't see rust under areas like this, you want to check out rust along the bottom. And this one has a slight little bit of surface here, tiny bit of corrosion. You want to make sure you identify those areas, because that can start getting very costly. Check your documentation, check your Carfax, CarProof, and look it up from along the top and as well under the bottom. And you could tell pretty quickly how good that vehicle is if it's rusty. If it is too rusty, bye-bye. If you get a couple little bubbles here or there, maybe not the end of the world. You could probably still get another 10 years out of a vehicle. Even if there's a couple little bubbles here or not, that's not the end of the world. The big thing is underneath, you don't want too much chassis rust. The next thing, let's have a quick look at the interior of the vehicle. So first of all body panels, everything's consistent. But opening this up, of course, you're gonna look, everything here, I mean, it's a lot of hard plastic in a lot of these older vehicles. It's holding up well. Disregard, looks like the current owner is still using this. Obviously, there's a little bit of grit, but just needs a light vacuuming. This is actually holding up really, really well. Considering the age of this vehicle being over 20 years of age, you have a vehicle that wears very, very well. These cloth seats are amazing. They are not wearing out one bit, one iota. There's no real rips, tears. Well, there's a slight little bit of sag right here. There's some cushion. That's just from getting in and out, but it doesn't look terrible. Leather seats often don't wear nearly as well as a lot of these vehicles do. Now, obviously you can check this. Since you're out here, we can have a quick look at some of the functions. That's working. That's working. So you want to check all the electrics. You also want to climb inside and take a good look around, make sure everything's intact. Okay, everything's here, nothing's missing, no big gaping holes. Sometimes people put aftermarket decks. I personally am not a big fan. I mean, if you want to do it once you own the vehicle as a used vehicle, that's fine. But it's nice to see all original equipment that's functioning and working very, very well. So what we can do before we actually start the vehicle, let's put that in, turn it on. It's full ignition without running. Make sure signals are working, all your lights are working like that. Try that. Wiper blades, make sure that's working fine. Of course, cruise control, we can check all of those features, and you definitely want to check all that once you hit the road. Some vehicles were equipped with sunroofs, this one is not, but you definitely want to check stuff like that because that can get very costly to repair. Sunroofs that come off the rails. In this case, it's very simple. This thing, everything stays, it works well. Here, this is working fine. I have some basic tools which I'll show you using those in a moment. But basically, check your heater, everything's functioning well. Turn on the stereo, make sure everything's working. Everything seems to be working in this vehicle. So there's no real concerns with the general controls. You definitely want to check out windows. Let's just close that up. Let's just check the window. Try the other one. Try the back one here too. So it appears everything seems to be functioning inside in a general level. Now remember, we're talking about a 20-year-old vehicle, and it's not really necessarily worth nickel and diming, depending on the price that you might be shopping for in this used vehicle. The big thing is, are the major items working? There might be the odd item that doesn't work. It's not the end of the world. Sometimes you'll look at a panel like this, and maybe 3 windows out of 4 is working. It could be a switch. It could be even a window regulator over there, or it could be something a lot simpler. But generally, if one item's not necessarily working, not the end of the world. And I've got a caliper here. I want to show you this just generally briefly because a lot of times when you're dealing with tires and brakes, those can start to add up a lot of money. I mean, with a full-size truck like this, if you have to put a new set of tires on here, that can cost you $1,500, $2,000 for a set of tires by the time you get them installed and balanced and all of that. It could cost you a significant amount of money. But also the brakes that are housed behind there can also cost a significant amount of cash if you do not do them yourself. And a lot of people can't, so they want to take their vehicle into the dealership so that they can get their vehicle fixed entirely. So those brakes, you want to make sure the brakes are good. You can end up spending thousands of dollars. Like if you had to do a complete set of discs, rotors, pads installed, and even worse if there's calipers to change out. I mean, you could be on the hook for $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 or more, and you can quickly find brake disc specifications on a 2003 Dodge Ram 1500. Type that in and it'll tell you dimensions. It'll usually give you diameter. It'll give you specifications for thickness, and that's where I like to take this. So I take the mic here, and you can use this to expand, and then I like to adjust it, set it on the pad, on the disc, and then just until it stops, turn it gently to the side, take it out, and then look at the measurement. And when you're looking at the actual measurement here, it'll tell you the wear thickness of that disc. But just in case you don't have that tool, and just in case you don't want to pull up those numbers and specifications, there's a quick check you can do as well. Now there's 2 components to the brakes. There's the disc itself, which is the rotating surface, and then there's the pads, which are tucked in the calipers. Now the calipers, you can usually do a quick inspection. It's very hard to see. Some, depending on the wheel configuration, sometimes you're able to see in the end. Sometimes you can even feel it. Sometimes even just by looking in at certain angles, you can definitely find and check on the general thickness of the pads. But a good giveaway too are the discs, because pads are often relatively cheap. $40, $50, $60 for a full set of pads is not that much money. The big one is the discs. So if your discs are worn out, that's where you start to run in the cash. So I'm a little more critical on checking the disc wear. And so these ones are brand new. These were just changed, I know. So you can, if you don't have the caliper, you can run your finger over the edge like this, and there's no lip. If you find a lip right along that edge and it's fairly substantial and it feels like a really good little chunk, that's a good likeliness that your discs are getting down in wear and tear, and you might have to start considering the replacement of new discs. Check that the back, check that on the front, check that on the back, and then you can get a pretty good perspective of whether the vehicle is going to need discs, front, back, front. pads, discs. Again, you don't know right down to the number. The PPI will do that for you. But if you got good discs, even if you had to put a set of pads, it's not the end of the world. It wouldn't cost you a ton of time or a ton of money. So that's a quick check you can do as a do-it-yourselfer. Now, another great check you can do for tire wear. Of course, you want to look both the front, take a look around, of course, the fronts, the backs, on both sides. Sometimes you have an alignment issue. Make sure you check all 4 wheels for general wear and tear. And as I cycle around, you can have a quick look right back here as well. And you can see, does the vehicle look like it has a proper stance? Because there's variables like toe in and of course general camber, which tells you whether those wheels are pointed in the right direction or not. And those will also indicate if there's odd wear and tear on these tires. Now this tire all of these look fairly uniform in terms of wear, although they're almost bald. These tires are almost toast. So you have to ask yourself, well, how do I check that? Well, either you have one of those $5 tire wear gauges, or you could actually use a penny. Here's a penny with Lincoln's face on it right there. So you see Lincoln on there? Definitely you can use that. So where you turn Lincoln upside down on his head right there, and you put him into the grooves of that tire, then what you can do is see Lincoln. So you push that all the way down to the bottom, and if you're able to see all of Lincoln's head, then the tires are bald. And in this case, you can see clearly that all of his head and then some is exposed. That means these tires are pretty much bald and ready for replacement. But then we can take a look at this other one. These backs aren't quite as bad. I looked at these earlier, and when you sink the penny in there, his head is slightly hidden, very, very slightly hidden there. That means these tires even go up the middle here, and it's even less wear in the middle. So right there, most of his head's covered, or part of his head's covered. That means there's a little more wear around the edges. These tires have been rotated, so that's part of the reason for that, because the front wheels tend to wear more on the outer edges, and the back wheels often in the center or on the inside edges, depending on the type of cars. And a lot of European cars have a more aggressive camber, so you'll find typically more wear on the inside edges. But a vehicle like this, with general wear and tear more on the fronts, I know these tires originally came from the front, and that's why they're a little more worn on this outer edge. All right, let's check under the hood there. We'll open the door, we'll pop the hood right here, and we'll cycle around and open up the hood just like this. In this case, usually have a 2-part operation right there, and that's just an interlock, so if the hood pops open on the freeway, that it's still latched and it doesn't go flying off. So there's many things you want to look at under the hood. A big part of that is the radiators, coolers. You have air conditioning, condensers, compressors all under the hood. You also have transmission coolers. You have the engine radiator right there, the big one. And the key there is, of course, making sure that you don't have any drips or leaks. Look along the bottom edges, because if there's a leak, water always tends to find, or fluids tend to find their way to the lowest point. So give it a good look underneath and make sure that you don't see any kind of leaks anywhere underneath any of those radiator or cooling system parts. And then also what you want to do is take a look. You'll notice most of these fins here, although granted quite dirty from bugs and rocks, they're not really that bent. Neither of these. This is a fairly new radiator, by the way, so this should look fairly new, and everything looks pretty good here. You don't want to touch these or bend them or spray them too hard. It's okay to blow them out with compressed air, but you don't want to start putting tools in there to try to pick away at parts, because you can bend these fins, and the more you damage, the worse the cooling system is. So right now what we're looking at are some bugs, and these really aren't hurting anything. Everything's still cooling as it possibly should. Then as we look under the hood, fuse box, really no point going in there unless there's an issue. Battery, you can do a battery check on that. You'll notice this probably wouldn't hurt to have some cleaning done. These terminals are getting a little crusty. That often means you've got a chemical reaction going on there. They are easy to clean. Take them off one day, use a scrub brush, maybe put a little Vaseline on there. But that's a giveaway that you've probably got a lot of chemical reaction. This battery's been up and down cycled quite frequently. And realistically, if the vehicle starts well, I wouldn't bother with the battery. It's probably fine for a while. Remember, it's an old vehicle. There's no point in putting a $100 saddle on a $10 horse. If it starts today, it's probably good. When it stops cranking very well, put a new battery in it. This is your brake master cylinder. When you're pushing the brakes on the floor, this is your brake master cylinder, and here's your top up fluid. Now you'll notice right in here that says maximum right there, max, right there. Now this should be fairly clean, and often a lot of these older vehicles get a little bit neglected, and maybe it wouldn't hurt to budget to change the brake fluid. In this case, the brake fluid is topped up, so you're adequate. You want to make sure that it's not too low, because if it's too low, then you often lose some of your braking capacity. But by also bleeding the system, you would get a lot of that water and moisture out of the system, less likely of corrosion or corroding your brake lines. So definitely something you want to make sure you check it out and that it's topped up. In a case like this, most vehicles will have a power steering system. This one's quite dirty. It is getting checked regularly. If you start to hear a significant howling noise when you're turning the steering wheel, like a really, then there's a good chance. Check your fluid levels, make sure your power steering fluid is up to snuff, and make sure your belt that ties your power steering pump all together is up to snuff. Make sure the level is adequate and you're using the correct viscosity and the type of fluid for the power steering fluid. After checking the power steering right there, you want to make your way through the rest of the engine compartment. Obviously, this is your intake air coming in here. This is going into your throttle body right here. In this case, it wouldn't hurt to pull these clips. I won't do it today, but rip these clips off, lift this up gently, very gently. You don't want to have a crack or a break in there, and check the air filter. That's the air filter. And check, some engines have 2, some engines have 4, but in this case, we have 1 engine air filter, and that goes to your intake system. You got to make sure you have clean air. Lift that up. Make sure there's no dirt on the back side of the filter, because the air comes in this way and then comes up through the housing, through the filter, and then into the engine. So the top side of this, the downside of the filter, should always be clean, and if it's not, you might want to really clean it out really well and make sure you got a new filter in there. Then of course, washer fluid right here, not super critical, but if you're in a dirty area or springtime and there's a lot of crap on the road, it's good to make sure that's topped up. Not a big deal, not a negotiation tactic. Just make sure it's full every time you set out. Then of course we have, this is a new radiator. This essentially keeps the engine coolant. So this pink fluid you're seeing in here is the same fluid that's circulating through this cooling system. So what you want to do, this is one of the key lifebloods of a modern day vehicle. Make sure that your cooling system is topped up. In this case, it's pink, it's been flushed, it's all new. When we did the radiator, we put all new fluid and flushed it. So as you can see, it's pure, it's clean, it's all consistent. If you have a layer, a line of dark, I've seen this before where you might have a band of different color or a line. Sometimes that means something really, really bad. That could mean mixing. You could be getting oil in there. It could be in a blown head gasket, and that could be a serious, serious problem for you. So you want to make sure that you don't have that line. I've also seen in diesel engines where you see a band of different color, and often what that means is you're getting diesel fluid or diesel fuel into the cooling system, and that's usually a symptom of cracked fuel injectors or the injector cups. I had that back on my F350 turbo diesel Ford once many years ago. The injector cup that actually holds the injector in place in the engine, that can crack, and then you wind up getting fuel past there because it overpressures the cooling system. It has more pressure than the cooling system does, and as a result then you end up putting that diesel fuel in here. The other thing, giveaway, you'll sniff around, and if you smell that raw diesel under the hood right really near there, often that's a giveaway. So make sure that the coolant level is topped up and that it is free of all kinds of strange lines or inconsistencies. Make sure it's all good to go. Also check cooling system, clamps, hoses, give it a little squeeze, make sure everything's tight. Here's a big main upper rad hose. Make sure this is always in good shape, that there's no bulges, no inconsistencies throughout this rad hose. And the same thing down below, there's a lower radiator hose. Down under here, you'll find a lower radiator hose as well, and that's also worth looking at. Another thing I like to look at, the engine bay. Now this one's got a little oily on top. Valve cover gaskets, not uncommon to have a little bit of oily residue on top of the valve cover gaskets. It's really not the end of the world. You could reseal it, but for a 20-year-old truck, if I'm not adding oil between oil changes and there's a light bit of oily residue, I'm not getting excited about that. Up here, maybe at the bottom, you might see on the engine oil pan here, you might also see a little bit of oil underneath the engine there. That's not necessarily worth getting too excited about as long as it's not dripping on the ground. And as you'll notice, there's no oil sitting on the ground here, so that's not a big concern at this point. This vehicle's not leaking any oil. Okay, so after you check, make sure you don't really have any engine oil leaks. There's a couple things you want to check real quickly. Transmission right here is your transmission dipstick. You basically check that when the vehicle's hot, run it through all the gears up and down, and then park the vehicle in idle and pull this dipstick out. and then you can check the fluid with a rag and make sure that the fluid looks good. You also want to make sure it doesn't smell strange or it's burnt, because that tends to burn. It is a reddish product by very nature, and if you see a very, very dark brown or red or black, you may want to consider that. But I'm not a big fan of flushing transmission fluid. Often it just leads into bigger issues. Definitely don't flush it. Maybe drain it out, fill it back up, never flush that, is my train of thought, because you usually end up with slipping or problems after you do a flush. Okay, engine oil right here. We can do a quick check, and I'm gonna pull the dipstick out, and what we can do there is we see, I'm gonna just pull that out, and I'm gonna replug it, and I'll show you. After I push it in, check the oil, always worth doing. Give it a look. You'll see it's fairly consistent. It's medium brown. Oil probably wouldn't hurt to do an oil change sometime soon. You'll notice it's pretty much within the hash mark, so it's definitely within the area it needs to be, so it's full enough. But give it a bit of a smell. Some good mechanics, I'm not one of them, suggest maybe give it a smell or even a taste test. I would never suggest tasting. It's a controlled substance. Don't do that. But give it a smell. If it smells like something bad, make sure there's nothing, no frothiness under there or any kind of white mixing, maybe coolant, because you don't want to see coolant in the oil. That would be bad, because then that would suggest maybe a blown head gasket or some other issue. Here, just in case, if you have to add it or check it, sometimes it's good to take this cap off. This is the engine oil filler cap. You pull that off. The backside of, if there's a lot of froth and foam, you might actually consider that you may have a blow-by issue. And what's a blow-by issue? Well, if your rings are gone, it tends to sometimes create this extra frothing within the oil. You could wind up with, again, you know, a little bit of that foaminess coming up to through the case, and you could actually see it on the top, and a lot of that shows itself at the bottom edge of that filler cap. So definitely watch out for blow-by. Make sure the oil looks fairly clean and consistent, that you don't have other products in there that shouldn't be in there, and you should be good to go. So another thing that's super important, first of all, of course, we have the gauge cluster here. Let's go for a start. And we want to look, of course, and see what we're dealing with in terms of check engine lights, which unfortunately there is one here. But this truck is so clean, or I have lots of faith that there isn't anything significant going on here. But when you see a check engine light, that's always a red flag. Why isn't it cleared? Why isn't it fixed? Those are some questions you have to ask yourself. So that's why either you take the pre-purchase inspection, get it taken in, or if it's a lower cost vehicle, if the owner, he doesn't have to let you, but if the owner is okay and you plugging in your OBD2 code reader, and now I'm not the guy that's carrying around that $10,000 OBD code reader. I'm gonna keep it simple. I'm gonna do something that the noobs out there like you and I are able to use, a $50 code reader like this, and you plug this into your OBD2 port. You find that port under here, fiddle around, there you go, it's plugged in. And then just let that tell you what it's gonna tell you. Okay, so what we have here is a P0135. It says it's an O2 heater circuit, bank 1, sensor 1. Scroll down, there's another one, and it's the same thing. So it's showing up twice, but basically all that is saying there's no other faults other than this O2 heater circuit. But the O2 heater circuit isn't super critical. Now, I'm not here to say advocate for disregarding check engine lights. That's a minor one, because every O2 sensor, there's usually 1 or 2 upstream of the catalytic converter and then 1 or 2 downstream of the catalytic converters. This one here is usually upstream. So for the first 30 seconds, 45 seconds or so, while the engine is warming up, preheating the O2 sensor, simulating a hot engine, simulating a hot O2 or the catalytic converter. And so in doing that, it's heating up. Well, that's just telling you that there's a fault on that heater circuit itself. If the vehicle's running smooth, which it is, it's smooth as silk, it's running smooth, no weird noises, the engine's quiet as silk. So there's no issues. This basically means that you could change it out, but it's a 22-year-old vehicle. If you want to change it, if you want to use it as a negotiations tactic, most of those sensors you can find for under $100. Labor, I'll warn you, sometimes they're really ugly to change, but the labor can be pricey. It might not be. You might be able to do it at home, but the sensor itself is anywhere from $50 to $100. Not super expensive. It's still doing its job. The vehicle's running smooth. I don't see any black smoke out of the exhaust. everything's running fine. Change it if you want, if not, that's okay. Other than that, I don't see any other weird lights. We already know because we scanned it, there's no other faults or codes on the system, but that P0135, so there's nothing really else to worry about there. The next thing we want to do is go for a short drive. We want to make sure it engages the gears properly and make sure it drives nicely down the road. We're going to use the lever. Make sure it's smooth, engages very smoothly, and then shift this to reverse, very quiet, no clunks, no grinding. It goes very smoothly backwards. So far at the parking lot, do the check, the top, the bottom, everything looks tickety-boo for a vehicle that's 22 years old. It's clearly worth it. This vehicle's clean, virtually no rust. It runs quiet, fluids are as they should be, brakes and tires, other than the tires could need a swap. This is clearly a great vehicle to buy on the used car market. And any car, SUV or truck that looks this good with these kind of miles, I've got 170,000 miles or kilometers on here, it's about 110,000 miles. The vehicle is clearly running very well, but we don't know until we do a road trip. All right, let's throw her in gear and try it. Whoa, shit, goes nice. It's got a little giddy up and go there. So it's got some oomph. No weird noises, no hesitations. You always want to make sure you're looking for that. The steering, very direct. I know a lot of Dodge products, a lot of times they get loose in the front end. They always talk about loose front ends on the Dodge. This one's actually pretty good in this Ram. It brakes straight, there's no issues there. And let's just see, the downshifts will go to second. Okay, it shifts nice and gentle into second gear. Up to drive again. And so it's trucking along quite nicely, I might say. No hesitation. The vehicle follows a straight line. Everything's aligned. One thing to watch out for are steering wheels that are turned slightly cockeyed when you're driving down the road. That could be an indication of a bad alignment. Maybe the car's ran into a few curbs. Watch out for that. Make sure that the steering wheel, when you're going in a straight line, that the steering wheel is perfectly square. That's ideal. Otherwise, it could indicate something to be looking out for, or like I said, maybe not the best case scenario. But let's slow down, and then we'll do a little acceleration because, yeah, this looked nice and straight. Here, listen, here we go. Shifting, watch for the shifting. Shift, and then shift. Everything's shifting smoothly. You'd think this vehicle only had 40,000 miles on it. So it runs really nice. It doesn't make weird noises. Very throaty, no hesitation. Follows a straight line whether you're braking or whether you're accelerating. No strange noises, no clunking. Probably want to take a turn here and to make sure that there's no clunking, or because the other thing, sometimes with four-wheel drives, you get the front differential and you get the front axles or half shafts. Sometimes if you get bad bearings or CV joints or any of that, sometimes you can hear clunk, 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 tick, 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 tick when you're turning. You may not hear it when you're just driving along. But let's just pull over for a second and let's just turn around and see if it makes any weird noises when we're turning. Very smooth, quiet that way. Listen to that. Very smooth, strong. That's healthy. So you're just listening for strange noises, looking for smooth, consistent acceleration, watching that the shifting is going well, and that the vehicle's following a straight line. Absolutely beautiful. For a 22-year-old truck like this, why would you buy a $90,000 truck to replace this? This is perfect. The only thing you might need to do is put some new tires on this, and it could use a new windshield, because clearly this one's seen its better days. And with all that said, I want to thank each and every one of the new members right there. Check it out. You can also become a member. I can prioritize your questions and answers. And check that video. Some of the most reliable vehicles of 2024. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.